Thursday, August 5th, it's time for another episode of The Grail. Let's sit down and get into this man's story. Gabriel Currie, owner and creator and builder of Echopark Guitars, now located out in Detroit, Michigan. This guy's story is intense, and I think you guys are going to love it, man. Talk about a survivor coming up from the ashes. A lot of great people playing his guitars. Aerosmith, Queens of the Stone Age, Social Distortion. The list goes on and on and on. He also makes amplifiers, and you're going to love it. Before I do get into it, I want to tell you that this episode is brought to you by MB Leathers. You got to get yourself a nice belt or some saddlebags for your motorcycle. Or how about a hand-tooled seat? Whatever you need in leather, this man can do it. He could probably even cover your guitar in leather. I'm sure he can. MB Leathers. Go to his Instagram right away. Tell him I sent you. And I own 2 of his belts, and I wear them every day. 2 belts. Dean 2 Belts. It's my hip-hop name. Watch out for Dean 2 Belts. Anyway, the Grail is here, and I cannot thank you guys enough for tuning in every week. We're almost at number 50. I can't believe it. Just cruising along, building a library of all these makers, these artisans, creators, heroes of mine. Let's get into it. Here he is right now, number 39, Gabriel Currie, Echopark Guitars.
Hey, I'm Gabriel Currie. I own Echopark Guitars in Los Angeles, but now going to Detroit.
Yeah, man. Now, I heard about your guitars from numerous people. Steve Rose, of course, but one of my favorite humans on the planet, Dave Ketching, plays the Carina V, and I am an absolute Carina V freak. And I saw it, and I was like, "Oh, I want one of those," you know.
Right.
And
Me too.
yeah, right. It's hilarious. And so I started jumping down the rabbit hole, and I realized you were right here in Echopark. And by the time I hit you up to do the podcast, you were driving down the freeway on your way to Detroit with the shop completely packed up. Yeah. So let's get into that a little bit.
Yeah, I, born and raised here in Los Angeles. And
wow, where at?
Actually, Highland Park and East LA, greater East LA, just Glass Hill Park, Highland Park, predominantly gang-infested neighborhoods of the 70s and that kind of thing.
Highland Park has changed, huh?
It's insane, yeah.
It was straight up just ghetto, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was a complete shithole. I mean, it was super cools, heroin, trains, The fucking trains were all, there was a railroad, not a station, but like I don't even know what you would call it. It was like the crossroads where all the trains converged, like behind Dodger Stadium, that whole area going along like the river and shit, It was just like clank and clunk all day, all night, and just, people fighting and getting shot and fucking chicks screaming. And
old school LA.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Even, we look at Echo Park. I mean, I remember 15 years ago or whatever, seeing a movie called Echo Park. I think was it Echo Park? Yeah, about the girl gangs, and I was like, wow, I mean, it is so changed, and it's creeped because what happens is West Hollywood's too much money. So then people move to, the first neighborhood to really blow up was Silver Lake.
Yeah, my dad was an artist, and so he taught at Barnsdall Park when I was a kid, and gave lessons and bullshit like that. And then I first started going into Echopark proper about 10 years old.
Right.
I was about 10 years old, and it always seemed like another ghetto, obviously, but it seemed a little different. I never knew the history of it growing up, until maybe 20 years ago.
What is the history of that? They got the beautiful lake there.
It's the birthplace of the film industry, basically.
The film industry?
As we know it. Yeah, the first film, the Max Sennett Studios, was erected there on Glendale Avenue, right before you hit the Echopark sign as you're going into Echopark off the 2 freeway on Glendale Avenue.
Yeah.
All that was actually basically the Hollywood Film Studios from back in the day. Laurel and Hardy, all the Keystone Cops, all that shit.
Wow.
Came out of the Keystone Studios, and then the Max Sennett, and then Keystone Studios was erected about maybe 5 years later, right across the street. So, the birthplace of the film industry and actually the entertainment industry as we know it, kind of started there. And when I started kind of getting the itch to get back into making guitars again, because I left guitar making when I was in my late 20s because I wanted to go do drugs and tour and record.
Were you playing music at the time? Let's get into a little bit of the history of that. Like, so you're young growing up in L.A., and you're 50 now, so what are you into back then? Are you into the punk scene? Or are you into the glam, hair scene? Are you into Jane's Addiction? What are you listening to?
I was listening to Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf.
Oh, wow, you're a blues guy.
Yeah, I was listening to all that stuff, and I got into guitar building. I couldn't keep up with the shred guys and the Van Halen thing and the whole trip, during the 80s. It wasn't my thing. I was, like I said, Clapton, Howlin' Wolf, B.B. King, Elmore James,
Stevie Ray.
Well, that was a little later, but as a kid,
of course,
he was there, and it was like, okay, then you get turned on to like all the Kings and all that shit, and so I got steeped in American music, really, like, and then country, of course, and then I was also into AC/DC, and then I heard Fear, the record.
Who?
Fear.
Oh, Fear. Oh my God, the first one.
Yeah, and my friend Tony Malone, who's still my friend today, he was in a band called Detox back then.
Yeah.
It was a seminal LA punk rock band. They were out of Highland Park, and right next door to them, Exene and those guys lived there. John and Exene lived right next door to them. So at 11, 12, I got introduced to punk rock.
Wow.
And that was when...
And that's the ground zero shit.
Yeah.
X, Fear, Circle Jerks, all
Black
that
Flag
stuff.
and,
Black Flag,
all those guys,
Germs,
ironically, all that stuff.
Dead Kennedys, you're rocking them, San Fran stuff.
Everything, Flipper, all that stuff.
Yeah, Flipper.
So I was, Agent Orange, everything, so I got into all that stuff.
You going to shows back then, like at the Palladium?
Yeah. Well,
where are you going?
We were going to the Stardust Ballroom a lot.
Oh, sick.
Yeah, Stardust Ballroom a lot. Raji's, of course, Al's Bar. The Gaslight, that was still there.
Gas Lamp?
Fender's Ballroom.
Oh, yeah, Fender's Ballroom.
The Doll Hut, later on.
The Doll Hut, I forgot about that. Orange County.
Yeah, all that stuff. The Scream.
Scream.
All those clubs. And so I was a young kid, wasted youth, all that shit. So
who was some of your favorites you saw back then? Because I saw X not until they got back together finally when they get, Billy Zoom back in the band. Yeah. I remember this was probably, late 90s or something. They played the Guinness Beer Festival, and it fucking blew my mind, man. I mean, I couldn't believe Billy Zoom, the way he played and that weird winking and his moves and shit, and then those two harmonies going, like when they cover Soul Kitchen and shit.
Yeah, well, his dad, Billy's dad was a big band guy, jazz guy, so he grew up in a very musical house, and I think he plays several other instruments, but he is like a fucking genius. That guy's like a total rocket science.
Yeah, he's like an idiot savant, right? He builds stuff. He builds his own amps and shit.
Everything. And so when I first heard X and there was a Fear, X, Detox, and Black Flag were kind of the things that I circled around, and those Circle Jerks and all those other guys. But those were the ones that I was like latching onto, and it was kind of more because of the roots of like the vocals and the melodies and stuff like that were still very much rooted in blues and stuff like that.
And they had songs.
Yeah, and
it's funny melodies. Because when you listen to like Holiday in Cambodia, you know what I mean? That's a goddamn hit.
Yeah.
The first time I heard it, I was like, oh, who's that? I heard it on KUSF. Howie Klein played it, and it's like, here it is, Holiday in Cambodia. And I was like, man, that song is amazing. I didn't even know what the fuck it was, you know?
Jellovy is a genius to this day.
Yeah.
He still like represents the thing about punk rock to me was like it represented all the fucking degenerates, and all the losers and fucking, and we weren't even like officially losers or anything.
A lot like heavy metal,
Yeah.
just different kinds of heavy metal is kind of blue collar kids who, parents divorce hits big time in the 70s and 80s, and they're just like angst and shit. Same with that.
Yeah, a lot of misdirected energy and youth. I mean, the thing that we all kind of go through. So, and my parents were together and stuff like that, but they're kind of a mixed couple, if you will. My mom was Native American and my dad's white as the driven snow.
Right.
And so there was a culture class of sorts there, but I guess they had great sex, so that's what it was for. Something was good, right?
Yeah. It's funny you say if I close my eyes, I would think I'm interviewing Sean Penn. You sound a lot like him, and you kind of look like him,
Fuck, give me his money. I'll take 10% of his fucking down.
So you're early on, you decide you want to build guitars.
I don't know if I decided. I think it was just one of those things where I was naturally curious and wanted to take shit apart and figure out how it worked. And guitars just kind of, the allure was like this magical thing that makes women go crazy and people dance and Elvis and all this, Chuck Berry and all that stuff. It's like the people are, it's kind of like the Pied Piper kind of, it's like a lute, and so I just was attracted to the mechanical aspect of it, and how and why it did that thing that it does. And still to this day, I don't know what that is.
Right. Were you like in high school taking wood shop and metal shop and shit like that?
I took wood shop in the 7th grade and started making like big giant pipes to smoke weed out of and shit like that.
Yeah.
First thing on the list,
You doing a lot of drugs back then?
Yeah.
Yeah. What were you into?
I was into speed and pot.
Yeah. That was the drug, right? Speed.
Cross
that gets you working on guitars. You're tweaking. You start tearing shit apart, right?
Yeah. Cross tops, weed, and alcohol. And then as I graduated into the punk rock scene and started hanging out with a bunch of dirtbags and street, urchins, it was heroin.
Yeah.
I got into heroin and crystal meth and all that good shit. And I think it's how you do things like that, not necessarily that you do them or not. It's kind of, if you're lucky enough to kind of have an internal buffer that, kind of keeps you close enough to the edge, but not going over. That's
true.
All good. And I don't know that, I think as I progressed and that, it kind of all just went hand in hand. It's like drugs, guitars, and music. And it was just like a culture of that, and living in abandoned houses and, all that good shit. So it wasn't.
It's funny because I remember that big Say No to Drugs whole campaign in the 80s and all that Nancy Reagan shit and stuff. And I never, I would never take back all the partying that I did because it's what you learn from it. You learn a few things: endurance. You learn about your body, and then you can really, like you said, you go all the way to the edge, but don't go over, and then you come back with the notes. You know what I mean? Like, here's what I learned from that, like, weird bender.
Yeah, like, I stayed up with Steve Human from the Vandals for, like, I think 2 weeks, and I was, like, 16.
Yeah.
And what we did in those 2 weeks, I can't really recall what it is, but I know we had a great adventure because we went up and down the coast in this little, I think it was a fastback, and he gave me the 2 week tour of like, this is how you do it kind of thing, and he's still alive today, and we're still friends. And
some Jack Kerouac shit there, right there, right?
Just like right off the bat, like as a kid, it's like, here's a bag of speed, and this is how you shoot it.
Yeah.
And there was no and this is like 85.
Yeah.
So 84 maybe, I don't know, something like that. And dangerous times, but we didn't really give a shit. We didn't think about anything like that.
Yeah, well, you're not thinking about, the future. You're just like, you're on the planet and your idols are burning it up and you're burning it up right next to them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I knew as a kid, like, Hendrix and Tage were dabbling and stuff. And there was no, I didn't really get there was no sure, I didn't know what exactly they were doing, but I know they were on some shit. So, I mean, later on, I learned that they were...
And all the blues guys.
All those cats, all the jazz cats too, all the heavy jazz cats. So, I mean, from Jakob Pistorius, down to Coltrane, all those guys were all fucking junkies. So when I got into dope, it was through a guy in Venice Beach. He was Ricardo Hernandez. He was an artist. And we'd just been hanging out, and I think I was 17, and we went downtown together, and he was going down there to score, and I was just hanging out with him, We got back to his studio back in Venice, and he did me out the first time, and
wow,
and that was it. It was kind of, immediately I was immersed in the drug culture, like 100% then. So, and I was still working on guitars, and all those guys' guitars I was fucking with, and then Ted Falcone, actually I spent some time with him tweaking fucking balls and working on guitars and amps and shit, and so that's kind of all I've ever really done.
It's, how'd you learn, like, when you first, what are you doing? You're just repairing guitars at first, so you're getting into like changing pickups, knobs, and capacitors, like all that shit.
Yeah, all the shred dudes in junior high school, that had way more faculty than I could muster at the time to do all that technical shit. All wanted, Floyd Roses and the DiMarzios and the pickups and the this and that. So I was just kind of in a particular, in a position where I could, figure it out basically. Yeah. So I actually would ditch school a lot and go to these other guitar repair guys in the neighborhoods and just go hang out there all day and just watch them and learn and kind of go back to school the next day or the next couple of days later and go, hey, I can give me the shit, I'll hook it up,
Wow.
And
you're like an early tattooist, carving into some guy's Charvel, put a Kaler on there. Everybody, that was the era where everybody needed a Kaler or Floyd Rose or EMG 81 pickups.
Yeah, and we all had shitty guitars. We all had shitty Japanese guitars or just like. There wasn't even like Mexican Strats then. It was all just.
Well, also back then, guitars were cheap.
Oh.
You know what I mean? It's like you could get a Charvel for like $500, and Les Pauls were a dime a dozen, It
was mostly SGs and Telecasters and Strats. I mean, I was in juniors, I can't tell you. I'd be bummed out actually if I could remember all the great guitars that I fucked up, altering them for friends of mine that wanted to fucking have a Floyd Rose or something.
A Floyd Rose on an SG Junior, can you imagine?
Oh no, I've done it. So, I'm guilty as fuck of ruining a bunch of shit, but I didn't know. It was just an opportunity to me, and those things were a fucking dime a dozen back then.
Yeah, totally.
Uncles were giving that shit away. So.
They weren't collector's guitars. I remember I was talking to Albert at Guitars R Us, and he had a million 59s and 58s. Yeah. Not a million, but he had one of the biggest collections, like 30 or something, and he got them all from guys coming in going, this is my uncle's piece of shit, Les Paul. I want that Charvel or that Jackson up there on the wall. And he'd go, here you go, trade. Yeah. And now look, he's retired out in Malibu with the most expensive guitars in the world.
Yeah, who would have known? I mean, I always liked them just because the blues guys had them. I got hit to juniors because Leslie West was playing them and stuff like that. So that's where I was really like, oh, that's the sound, that I want. And okay, a Sun amp and a Junior. That's what I'm gonna. So that's what I adopted, And it's always been my thing was like Tellys and Juniors and all that kind of stuff.
I think the Blackguard Telly, and I had this discussion with Mark Agnesi from Norms, and all these years I worshiped the 59 and the Telly, but at the end of the day, I think the Blackguard Esquire, the 50, 51, 52, 53 Esquire is the best guitar ever made.
Yeah, I mean,
as far as like just a blue collar rock and roll machine.
Yeah, I mean you can covers so much ground on that instrument. I mean, with the right amp, you can really do a lot of. I mean, as exemplified by Jimmy Page on the first Led Zeppelin album. I mean, that's what that is. You know, it's a Supro and a Telly.
Yeah, it's a slab board like Telly.
And you, I mean, and if you start listening to a bunch of stuff, you can hear that everywhere on a bunch of stuff. And you know, nobody was really the rules hadn't been established yet. You know, there was no doctrine. There was no. You know what I mean? Everybody was still kind of figuring it out, and so a lot of the silver tones and shitty little amps that you hear on like blues records and stuff like that. Those are the things that got ingrained into my DNA, into my sonic DNA, because it's all I was listening to. You know, so when I got mature enough to kind of develop a thing, you know, to start developing a voice, and then develop the way I build. You know, it took a minute, because I had to kind of go back to that, you know, and kind of allow that to surface, because I worked for Leo Fender right out of high school.
You did?
Yeah.
Out there in Fullerton?
Yeah, at the GNL plant.
Wow. What year was that?
That was 1988.
88. So, and what are you doing out there? Are you just building guitars?
I actually got hired on to just be a helper in the wood shop, you know, just pick up scraps and clean up and shit like that. Within a couple of weeks, I was basically running the shop.
Wow.
I just had a really keen. I had you know.
And this is pre-Master Builders and pre-Relics. Like, Fender to me doesn't really come back alive until they first build that no-caster Relic, the first one. They do the no-caster Relic, and all of a sudden, you know, people are like, whoa, this is a fucking Fender. It's got cloth wiring. It's got nitrocellulose paint. It's got the Bakelite guard, you know?
Yeah, there was a guy named Vincent. I forget his last name, but there was a guy named Vincent who did those first, you know, those first custom shop ones. But prior to that, this is like 1988. I got hired by Leo, George Fullerton, and Floyd, and those were the original guard. You know, back in the 52.
And were you talking to Leo and stuff?
Yeah. I mean, he was a little, you know, he was fucked up because he had a couple of strokes and shit like that. But he was kind of mumbling and murmuring, you know, kind of thing. But I got him alone after the interview, and I brought a guitar that I built. And he's like, you know, he asked me a couple questions about it, and we had a little conversation back and forth, and he just kind of looked at me, and he shook his, you know, we shook hands, and he like had a fierce grip.
Wow.
And we shook hands for like awkward, hard fucking handshake.
I always say that in the old days, you know, good grip, and then you just fucking held it, and that's how you knew you were a man or not. How weird is that?
Yeah, it was great.
Remember the old, this guy's got a soft shake. Let's get the fuck out of here. Soft shake is such a weird thing.
Yeah, so so we did the grip thing, and I got hired. The next day it started, and it was like I immediately knew. Well, this guy that was working there at the time, his name was Ed Seabest, and I think he was in the. I want to say that he was in the Heartbreakers or something, like one of those seminal bands back in New York back in the day.
The old punk rock Heartbreakers.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
And one of those bands. It was either the Cheetos or the Heartbreakers or one of those things, and he was running the neck department. So we got to talking and knew some of the same cats from the scene. And so it was him and I running the fucking wood shop, building custom guitars for like Will Ray and those guys in the Hellcasters, and the old guard coming from Bakersfield still, you know, and all that shit, because they were like country.
Yeah, that Bakersfield whole fucking thing.
G&L was all country guitars and shit like that. They weren't really a rock and roll guitar company.
G&L?
G&L.
Oh yeah, G&L. Yeah. You know, I talk about them all the time. The first year the G&L came out, you know, that was Leo's dream to have an upper class, you know, high end Strat and Telly, and that candy apple red G&L that came out, it had that crazy. It wasn't a Floyd Rose or anything. It was their own tremolo,
the Fulcrum tremolo,
and it had those switches to split coils and shit. That fucking guitar was killer, man.
I think it was a Comanche or an SC1, and there was a couple of other ones, but right when I got hired there, I was like, okay, now I'm fucking in the shit. So, and Ed and I would talk about it every day, how lucky we were to be working under that. Like, we knew that it was special. Like, we knew this was the last vestige of Leo,
Of the old guard, yeah.
Leo and the old guard, and so Floyd died first, and then Leo died, and then a couple of years later, George Fullerton died, and I was able to kind of be there during that time and soak up some of that DNA, and that really that's kind of where I learned production and like numbers and how to really like mill everything and glue it all up a certain way and what glue to use and thicknesses and pin routers and just all the manufacturing processes. And he was still doing, it was all 50 style production. It wasn't
hide glue and all that shit.
No, we were using aliphatic, yellow wood glue, basically. Nothing special, but like the conditions, the environment here in Southern California has been pretty stable up until like the end of the 90s, I think. I haven't done any measuring, but then it was all stable, so you could get stuff right off the truck, glue it up, have it in the clamps, and route it the next fucking day and send it on down the line.
Oh, because of the weather and everything.
Yeah, now we've had like 5 years of fucking endless summer and drought and shit, and it's just the climate's just changed completely. You can't, stuff that I've had for, wood that I've had for 20 years, pristine, cured, dried, quarter sawn, beautiful wood, started splitting on me a couple of years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because it's drying out weird?
Because it's dry and hot. Hot as fucking dry. And that's kind of what got me thinking about skipping town, basically.
Back in the day when I first moved to LA, let's say 16 years ago, in August to September, it would be like 90s, upper 90s, and you'd be like, this is fucking crazy. But, the last 5 years, it's like 85 to 95 for 6-7 months. Yeah. You're like, how fucking hot is it here? Yeah. And then everybody's blazing the AC and the fucking...
Yeah, it's baking, and there's fucking 30 Brazilian people here, and all nationalities, all walks of life.
Yeah.
All different, ethnicities and economic backgrounds. Of course, it's a huge metropolis, but the LA that I grew up in and remember is probably just as shitty as it is now, except I was a kid and didn't have a child or a wife. Yeah. Didn't have any thought
bills.
Buying a house, or
you didn't have to pay car registration. Nothing. Where it's fucking $1,000 a year.
Yeah, none of that
over
shit.
And over.
Yeah, none of that shit existed. So by the time I grew up, which is only a couple years ago, really, but by the time I grew up, I started. I quit making guitars when I was 28.
Why'd you quit?
Because I didn't want to wind up at the NAMM show floor, which is the National Association of Musical Merchants. It's a huge convention.
Talk about it all the time.
That goes on every year. And
at the Anaheim Convention Center.
All the music guys converge, and it's all the world sellers and dealers and wheelers and dealers and all that shit. And I just saw myself. I was so in love with what I was doing after I left. After Leo died, I went to work for a guy named Taco Sono, and he was a hand builder. Taught me all the handcrafted part of making guitars.
What was his company called?
Hosono Guitar Works, and he built he was strictly handmade guitars, mail order, one of the first mail order custom guitar guys in the world.
Wow.
And he was out of here. It was at the time of like Valley Arts and
Oh yeah.
And Michael Tobias, and so there was a really great heavy like custom guitar culture here in the city, and so I got hooked up with him, and immediately learned the other side of
the art of it,
the art of guitar making and instrument building and wood selection and combining different pickup configurations and different scale lengths and hand shaping necks and all the it goes on and on and on. But I immersed myself in that for a few years, and by the time I started thinking about like what my future would be like, I was in a band. I was still doing a lot of drugs, but somehow I managed to, I kind of got sick of it, actually. It was just way too, like, I found myself wanting to get behind the wheel more. I found myself
actually play the fucking
wanting
things.
to, like, discover what the fuck these things actually did and why, and get deeper into, like, vintage guitars and old guitars and figuring out what it was that was so special about them versus a Charvel.
Yeah.
Or anything new, basically.
Yeah, an Ibanez.
Any of that shit. Because they just were totally different things, and they felt different, they smelled different.
Yep.
Everything about them was different. So I wanted to kind of get back to that. And I wanted to play and fuck and do drugs and tour and, whatever else.
Yep.
And so it was just the responsibility part of showing up to a fucking job every day and working with machines that could take your fucking hand off in a second started becoming not that important to me. I started to think, well, I've done this now for about 10 years. I think I want to go do something else for a while. And I didn't want to wind up at the fucking NAMM show with the name tag on the shirt and waving and was selling somebody else's shit.
I tell you what, man, I go to the NAMM show. I went the last 5 years, but I hadn't gone for like 20 years. And the NAMM show, there's some sad. I can feel weird, sad vibes when I'm in places, and it might sound corny or whatever, but I can feel spiritual, weird, bad shit and stuff. And I remember seeing a guy. There's guys that are just standing at their booth that they spent like $5,800 worth. Oh. They traveled from say Spokane, Washington. Yeah. They set their booth up and they got their stuff, and they just stand there, and people just fucking walk on by them all day long. And I feel horrible for them because they don't have that money. They're like, fuck it, I'll go to NAMM. Maybe I'll pick up some kind of distribution deal or something. And it's really sad and scary, man.
Yeah, it's horrible. And like having done a lot of acid shit like that as a kid, I was like, okay, that's like the fucking worst acid trip I could ever do. Like exactly what you said. Like, and so I envisioned that as 27, 28, and I was like, okay, I'm not doing that. That's just not my reality. I can't do that. I'd rather go do everything else. And if the universe permits, and I still have hands and able-minded and still into this shit, I'll come back to this later.
So you actually had that vision.
I had that conversation with myself in the mirror one day, and I called my boss and said, hey, I quit. And I left him in a horrible lurch because at the time he had just a huge production run of Ibanez USA custom shit that we were doing for like Steve Vai or something like that.
Like the floral guitars and shit like that?
No, it was prior to the monkey grip ones. It was the neck through, the first USA custom ones.
The first like gems and shit?
That Ibanez did before the gems.
Wow.
Yeah. This was the USA custom line, and it was... I forget what the model was, but
so Ibanez was partying out their custom shop stuff to you guys.
Yeah,
that's fucking incredible.
Yeah,
so that's some good made shit,
Oh yeah. No, we did Michael Tobias's stuff. We did Roger Sadowski's basses.
Wow.
We did a bunch of high end, so-called builders. We were ghost building for them basically, and doing custom mail order stuff, and guys like Zappa and. I did some stuff for Frank and his kid, and then
you did some stuff for Frank,
Lukather, and guys like that.
Steve Lukather. What'd you do for Frank? He had that one SG forever, right?
We worked on a couple of his old guitars, and then he was always like fucking with new shit. So a couple of weird Strats and stuff like that. I think that Naples Strat that he had for a while.
Wow.
So just stuff like that. So through
Did you ever talk to Frank?
No, I never talked to any of those guys. I was the guy in the back.
Yeah.
Didn't get to talk to. Nobody knew that I was there.
You're like back there just fucking sniffing solder.
I was the assistant. So, and having had that experience and being close to it, when you're young, it's easy to kind of get
bitter.
Yeah, resentful. You know, as you're going along your thing, and you're seeing the chinks in the armor of others, you know, and you're developing your thing. So that's when I just quit. I was like, fuck it, I'm not doing this no more. I can't. You know, I'm not going to be that fucking bald dude in fucking Nen, you know, at 40 years old, working for some other fucking quack. You know, I'm just not going to do it. I'd rather flip the fucking coin in the air and go stick my dick in a bunch of shit and fucking shove needles in my arms and go get behind the wheel and play. Yeah. You know?
Yeah, so, I get behind that, man. I get it, man. It's just so like, let's fucking gamble on my own self.
Yeah, so that's what I did. I wanted to really, like, you know, really figure it out, you know, and see, like, test myself, you know, and see how willing I was to go all the way back down the rabbit hole and come back up again. So that's what I did for a while, and it led me to some places that I didn't really plan on going, but you know, I got there and I got out of there too. So
did you go to jail?
I went to prison a couple of times.
Wow. And what'd you go for? Robbery and stuff?
Armed robbery, the first one. Yeah.
Wow. And how did that go down? You rob a liquor store or what? Because I always trip on armed robbery, you know, because you're addicted to drugs, right? And you're like, I got a fucking score, and car stereos ain't paying for it, right?
Yeah, I wasn't even, I don't think I was really that addicted to drugs. I think the people that I was hanging out with at the time were still like shitty people, basically. And I kind of lived this dual life, you know, up until I had my kid. I always had like the shittiest, seediest like friends, like criminals and dope fiends. And then I had like my family and like all my nice friends and shit, you know.
It's almost like a Bukowski thing. Like you're this writer, but you got to go fucking way dark to write, you know.
You got to go deep, man. You know? And like my dad was an artist, so coming up, and we lived in the fucking ghetto. So I always had that weird dichotomy of like looking out the window and seeing fucking drunks and fuckers like either fucking in the alley or fighting or whatever, or shooting each other, and then my dad would be locked away in the back room doing a fucking oil painting. Or
the juxtapose of that is crazy.
A watercolor of fucking flowers and trees and shit.
That was his getaway, man, for sure. He was like, I ain't looking out that window. I gotta paint my own happy piece here.
Yeah, and he never sat me down and said, son, this is how you do it, right? Stuck a brush in my hand or any of that shit. I just kind of saw it. I witnessed it, you know, so it became a part of how I lived.
You robbed a liquor store?
No, I robbed a coke dealer.
A coke dealer?
A huge black coke dealer and his gay lover.
Wow.
Yeah, it was awesome.
And it was a place where you're scoring drugs all the time?
No, actually a friend of mine who was a drug dealer, we had his kids staying with me and my girlfriend at the time in Inglewood, and I was working. And his kid came home one day, and he was young, like 13, 14. We were taking him to school. We were watching him because his dad was busted, basically. Right. And he came home one day and said this dude had been following him home for the last couple of days to our house. And this last time he had stopped and basically hit him up, you know, like, hey, kid, I want to fuck you, kind of thing. And so I called a couple of buddies that I knew, and I had him. He did the same thing the following day, and we followed the guy to his fucking house, and it just turned out that he was a coke dealer. It wasn't like we knew he was a coke dealer. We were actually going there to fuck him up, basically. Right. And when we got in the house. This is horrible. Yeah. I've already been arrested for this stuff.
You're clean now.
So I'm not incriminating myself. Yeah. I had a 38 special, a police special. My friend had a 45. And we went in. We didn't kick the door down or anything like that. It was about 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the evening. We had the kid go to the house with the guy. We followed him there. They were in the bedroom. And he was getting ready to, you know, start fondling him or whatever. And we got in the house. As soon as we got in the house, we realized where we were. Yeah. Because we saw a couple of briefcases, a couple of bags, a couple of stacks of dough. Wow. So we got all that shit in the bag first. Yeah. And then we kicked the door in on the bedroom. Yeah. And the dude was undressed. The kid was still dressed, just in terror. And we duct taped the dude, and then we went into the other room, and his lover was in there, and we duct taped him, gagged him, put him face down on the bed, went back into the other room to the big guy, did the same thing to him, and then we started ransacking the place looking for the rest of the shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Wow.
So
This is fucking crazy shit here.
So we started going through the place, collecting goods, and we were just about done, and we left the guy alone in the room, and he got loose out of the duct tape that we had duct taped him with, and he had a piece underneath the pillow, and we didn't, we were fucking kids, we didn't know that, and, we were like 19, 20, something like that, and he came popping out of that thing firing.
Whoa.
And my buddy split. He got out of there, and I was left there. And so he actually got one off on me without because I wasn't on my guard.
Yeah.
And
he shot you?
Yeah, I got
Where
shot.
at?
I got actually it was actually almost point blank range. And I was enough to get my arms up in front of me.
Yeah.
With the loaded gun in one hand, and he got me through the wrist here.
Whoa, yeah, I could see it. Right. Oh, it went through both arms. Holy shit.
So so I was shot. So he took off after my friend, and I took off down the street. And
what a scene.
Yeah, it was crazy.
And so how do you get arrested for that? Because who's calling the cops on that? He's a dealer.
Yeah, he called the cops. Maybe he didn't. Maybe it was one of the neighbors or something like that, because it was shots fired in the fucking neighborhood, I mean, it's Inglewood, but still, So I get arrested, and I get, I didn't, I wasn't going to say anything, of course, but, so I got a 5-year sentence, and I did 2.5 years on that.
Where were you out?
I was actually out in Chino, and then I went up to Soledad.
That's got to be fucking just a complete game changer, right?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really plan on going down that road, but yeah, it changed me forever,
Yep.
Nothing bad, I didn't get raped or any of that shit, and I didn't have to, do anything stupid, but I immediately, there was guitars in there.
Oh, wow.
So I immediately went to, it's called Arts and Corrections. So they'll you can check out guitars when you get to prison, or at least back then you could. There was art education type stuff. So when I got to, after the reception center and 6 months of getting to where you're going to go do your time, I finally got there, and then there was a room with fucking guitars and old Gretches and amps and shit. And it was
wow.
Oh, this is cool. So immediately I started doing that, and there was a wood shop there, so I made another guitar there and just kind of furthered my passion, just kind of, I look back on it and go, wow, I guess I was kind of undeterred, I didn't get into any of the goofiness. I didn't make me into a better criminal or any of that shit. I wasn't interested in learning more about the trade or anything like that. I kind of I said, okay, well, that was stupid, and well, I'll learn my lesson here. So I got out a couple years later and continued making guitars again. So
wow, yes. I mean, also, if you look at it, it's you get out and you're like, fuck, what am I going to do with my life, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, because that's 2 years or whatever go by, and you're like, I better do something, right?
Yeah, so I got out, and it was 90, 91, 92, something like that. Leo was dead. That was when I got into the next phase, and I started my own thing. So maybe 93, actually.
Where do you land when you get out? Are you in Echopark?
I'm in Los Angeles. I'm in Highland Park, back home.
Highland Park, got it.
Yeah, wound up going back home, and then just started picking up the pieces again. And at that point, I went back to work for a classical guitar maker for a little while, and then back to work making guitars for TAC, and that lasted a little while, and then I moved down to San Diego and hooked up with a guy named Scott Madison.
Yeah.
And he was making guitars for the guys in the Scorpions and
in the what?
in the Scorpions.
Oh, the Scorpions.
He was doing like knockoffs of Carina V's and Explorers.
He was making those small Explorers for like Matthias and shit.
Yeah.
Remember he had the mini Explorers?
Yeah,
He had that one Explorer, the big one with the 3 black stripes.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden he started playing the mini ones.
Yeah, those were a Futura.
Oh,
and
wow.
what that is the predates
Yeah, the Explorer.
the Explorer.
Yeah, with the weird V headstock.
Yeah, and this guy Scott had an original one.
He had an original Futura?
Yes, so that was the guy. So that was when I started making, like, I got into like knockoffs. You know? And got into like old using old woods and all that kind of shit, and really getting into pickups and dynamics of
Kind of like Max when he was making those Les Pauls for like Slash and everybody.
Yeah, kind of like, pretty much just like that. And this was the guy down in San Diego that was doing it. So I hooked up with him for a while, ran his shop for a minute, and then I came back to Los Angeles in like 95 and started my own thing. It was called G String Guitar Works, and it was just like basically repairs and setups and shit like that. Nothing, no building yet.
Yeah.
Just kind of fucking around, and got back into playing music again and shit like that. And still wasn't like sure yet what was going on, but I was building and doing custom stuff shortly thereafter. And then I just kind of dipped out completely. I didn't think that I was well suited for the industry. I wasn't fit to be in a shop anymore. I kind of
Somebody else's shop?
Anybody else's shop, even my own. I didn't really feel like I was worth it anymore, kind of thing. And not that the drive or the passion or the curiosity wasn't there anymore, or the need or the longing. It was just I had kind of damaged myself at that point, and so I felt like I was not fit to be in a shop, basically.
Yeah.
And I still have all my digits, so
yeah,
that's the main thing. It's like you got to keep your fingers in this gig, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that was the other thing that kind of, I was like, well, if I'm gonna choose this other lifestyle, then I gotta like make a decision here. So again, I made that decision, and I got into historic restoration.
Oh, wow.
Historic building restoration.
Really?
Yeah, I got into like custom corbels and rescreening crown moldings from 100 years ago, and
like going to like people's old craftsmen's or Victorians and restore them?
Yeah, so I got into turn of the century homes.
Wow.
And got into like all the when downtown started getting turned over and rebuilt, I was hired by one of the big contractors there to like hang off of the side of buildings and sculpt new corbels and shit like that,
Wow.
Go into synagogues and start high relief crown moldings and like all the different ornamental stuff that was all the different ornamental plaster stuff and big buildings.
How you learning that shit? Are you just trial and error?
I think I just wanted to.
You're just like a wood guy, right?
I just wanted to learn something else,
right?
Really, and just it seemed like a fucking high paying job.
Yeah.
That I never made more than $20 an hour, and this was like $35 a fucking hour.
Wow, yeah.
So I was like, well, I'm just gonna do this then. Fuck it, I'll just do this, buy guitars, play in fucking bands, and that's it, and I'll be set. Well, and then I started getting hurt because I'm not built for that. Physically, I'm a little guy, so I'm not really built for like hauling hundreds of fucking pounds of concrete and shit.
Well, that shit fucks you up, man. You know what I mean?
Ass,
like I remember I was like, I did a lot of construction growing up, and I still remember like, carrying up that waterproof sheetrock for bathrooms up 2 flights of stairs, 3 flights of stairs. Like, fuck this, man. Shit weighs like, hundreds of pounds or doing dismantling old bathrooms, like pulling out those steel tubs. Fuck that. It's steel tub.
All those clawfoots with
the clawfoots,
porcelain and shit. Yeah.
Oh, this shit weighs like 500 pounds, and you're trying to get them down stairways. Your body's just fucked. You see all those old guys, man. They're just fucked. That's why they're drinking in bars.
Yeah, I was hanging off the scaffolding like 50 feet in the air, and with impact drivers and all kinds of shit like that, and heavy shit that I fell off a couple of scaffoldings.
Wow.
And that's what happened. We erected scaffolding to work in this church up in Altadena, and it was just a tower going straight up to this one windowsill. There was a cast concrete sill that was cracked that they needed repaired, so we had to drill through it, stick a rod in it, and patch it. Well, we had no place to tie off, and the thing just came crashing down with tools and mortar and shit in hand, and just fucked that place up.
Whoa!
And I somehow bounced off the floor and didn't get killed.
Unbelievable.
And, yeah, it was insane. So I
You're like a cat. You got shot at. You fell. 9 lives.
Yeah. Yeah, I got electrocuted, all kinds of shit.
You probably OD'd a couple times. You know what I mean? You're like,
certainly had the lights out a few times. Yeah. I've been blue, purple, green.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I just kind of like, I think what happens with some people that are on their path strongly when you see them is that they've been through all this other shit and tested all the other waters, and came back to like, okay, this is what I should be doing if you're lucky enough to get there. So by the time I met my wife and we had our daughter and stuff, I had already kind of been through all the things that I thought I wanted to do.
Yeah. You got it out of your system.
Yeah. And then and I was still working construction and doing all that kind of stuff. But she knew about my past and building guitars and stuff like that. And at the time I was in a band called D-Cry, a local punk rock band. And I didn't have a good humbucker guitar.
Yeah.
And so a friend of mine gave me a basket case SG, and I didn't have a fretboard. It needed a bunch of work. So she bought me eBay had just started. This is like
96.
something like that. Yeah, 97. So she bought me this is a little later on. This is like almost 2000 maybe.
Right. But eBay's early on. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
And so she bought a Les Paul custom fretboard, like an old one that had been scabbed off of a Les Paul, block inlays with the inlay board, with the ebony board, and I got it, and she's like, here, you can use this to make your this guitar. And I was like, wow, that's fucking cool of her to do that. And that was the first time where I was like, okay, I'm gonna see if I can have a little crack at this again. Just kind of, it was just in the back of my mind. I was like, okay, So I put that guitar together, and it came out really cool, and I played it for a bunch of years. And in that interim, a couple of friends of mine found out and started hitting me up again. Hey, would you build me this? Would you do this? Would you do that? And that kind of thing. So I got back into more of a hobby kind of thing because I was working, so I didn't need a job, but I was,
which sometimes makes it better.
Yeah, I was
because you're not doing it for a living.
Yeah, and so at the time I was able to get back into like all the new pickups and all the new shit that was out, because it had been years since I had even poked my head around the industry and saw what was out there. I didn't even know. Yeah. And then I started seeing guys like, Dennis Fano and James Troussard and some of these other guys that were doing
Zamitis
art stuff, and Zamitis, of course, and started kind of looking at stuff and going, that's interesting that some of the ideas that I had,
especially Troussard, man, because he comes out of nowhere with these rusted tellies and the Black Crows are playing them, and you're like, whoa, look at that. And the whole thing about him being metal, it was really like, and that boutique amp era is hitting, Matchless is hitting, and people start realizing, hey, the old stuff's great because it's made by hand and it's all done good. So we want that kind of shit. And this industry starts to boom again on that.
Yeah, totally. So there was a huge surgence of new boutique dudes around again. And this is like 10 years after I had left, you know. So it was interesting that so I figured, I was like, well, that's weird because, and so I went and started playing some of these things and just trying them out and checking them out. And there was a huge gap in what was visually there and sonically there.
So they might look really cool, but sound like shit.
They sounded, played, and felt like ass.
Yeah.
You know, they just, you know, didn't match. You know, there was a big gap there. So I got to thinking, you know, and this is just me just kind of pondering, going, I wonder if I could pull off, you know, what I was thinking that I could do like 15 years ago today. You know, I wonder if I could actually make an old new guitar,
Right.
you know. And so I started thinking about different things that I wanted to maybe explore, and we didn't have any fucking money or anything like that. We were just kind of living hand to mouth, and I just kind of, you know, as I was getting more and more injured and shit like that, it came to a point where I was like driving down the street one day, just listening to myself talk in my head, and just I you know, the light went on. It just kind of like went on.
Yeah.
And I remember the conversation that I had with myself years ago.
Yeah.
Like literally in the mirror.
I want to come back to this.
You know, so when it's time, I'll know, kind of thing. And I thought, okay, maybe I've been through all this shit. I've played a bunch. I know what this thing does. I know the ins and outs of the dynamics of different woods and how they interact with each other, what to expect sonically. Just by seeing it and knowing the species, what to expect sonically out of it, and how to balance that out. You know, what type of set neck do I use? How big the tendons are that should be used? Why a sliver of a tendon that's common in a Gibson, like a Les Paul or any of the other like SGs and stuff? Why it's so different from like a fucking Junior? Like a double cut Junior has this giant tendon that just goes right in and interlocks with the mass of the body, and it's two big giant chunks of wood locking together to create one thing. I thought, okay, that's the first thing I wanted to do. Is that's my staple right there. I'm going to develop that. And then the second thing was I still had with me a guitar that when Leo died, the next day I went into his lab, and the new owners of the company, the McLarens, you know, I was respected because I was running the fucking shop. You know, let me have some time in the lab by myself, and so I went in there, and up in he had a little loft area, you know, like storage shit and books and whatnot. And I went up there and I found a body, and the templates, and a couple of other, you know, little inventions and shit he was working on. Nothing too spectacular, but just tinkering shit. But I found this body and these templates, and the body had never went into production. It was kind of a telly kind of thing. It's kind of stretched out a little wider, a little longer than a telly, but nonetheless that kind of single cut bolt-on telly kind of thing. And the templates were there, and they were dated 1969, and that was the Trisonic R&D era.
Whoa!
So Trisonic R&D was a company that Leo and George started to basically still work under their no competition clause that they had with CBS when they sold CBS. Right. So they erected this little R&D company so that they could still tinker and fuck around.
Kind of like Marshall with Park.
Exactly.
Park amps. Yeah.
Well, Park was different. Park was a way for Marshall, for Ken Brand to make amps and make money at making amps because they were locked into a deal with the distribution company at the time.
Oh, I got
it.
They
couldn't do shit outside of the distribution company.
Right.
They couldn't have other dealers. They couldn't sell to anybody else. It all had to go through the distributor. So they put up Kitchen Marshall, Park. I think there was one more, but Narb was the last one they did, and that's Ken Brand's last name backwards.
Oh, wow.
So he was doing all Plexi era stuff.
Sick.
So that was the last kind of off brand of Marshall that Ken Brand did, and I actually acquired that trademark last year. So,
wow.
So we're going to be making the Narbs out of Detroit.
That's fucking killer, man.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of stuff.
So you got that Fender, that piece out of Fender.
Yeah, I had that guitar with me, and I was like, okay, all the bolt-on shit that I want to do is going to be based off of this guitar because it's Leo's last fucking thing, you know? And it wasn't ever announced. Nobody ever fucking knew about it. So I took it back to GNL when I first started having the conversations with myself again to get back into guitar making. I took that guitar down to GNL and said, This was like, I think this was like 2009.
Yeah.
I took that guitar down to GNL.
They're still open?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I said, hey, you know, I'm getting ready to start something. And I have this guitar. I've had this guitar since Leo fucking passed away. It's the last one that here's the templates, here's the guitar. You guys should have it. You guys should make this fucking thing. You know? And on the way down there, I was like, okay, I'm going to give this thing away. I'm going to fucking give this thing to these guys. If they reject it, or if they don't, are wishy-washy, I'm going to take that as a fucking green light.
Yeah.
You know? So I went down there and met with the heads and the fucking McLarens and shit, and they remembered everything, and it was like, oh, how you doing, blah, blah, good to see you, this and that. And they hooked me up with corporate, and then their artists and relations department, which I thought was fucking lame, because it was like, so I started going through the suits to get the thing, and I tried to get them to make the fucking thing,
right?
And they rejected it completely. So I just said, "Fuck it." That's the sign that I want, right? That's if there's a green light and a go, that's it. So on the way back home, you know, I kind of just had that other conversation.
You said this is going to be my shape and everything.
Yeah. So I just said, all
and
right.
was that the headstock was there too and stuff?
Headstock wasn't there yet. No, nothing like that. It was just
the body shape.
Just that body shape, and then I knew I wanted to do like junior bass kind of stuff. You know, just
1P90 stuff.
Yeah, you know that had to be developed yet. I was sure that I wanted to go down all kinds of sonic roads as far as pickups were concerned, but I wanted to you know, I wanted to have my set neck deal done and my bolt-on deal.
So that becomes the shape that you start Echopark Guitars with.
Yeah, the double cut junior type thing, and then I had a Supro dual tone at the time.
Which one is it? Is it this body here? Let's see. Is it this one?
Yeah, it's that style.
So it looks like a kind of like just a bigger telly.
It's like a stretched out telly kind of thing.
It is. Yeah, weird. So that becomes your jumping off point as that's going to be your signature shape.
Yeah. So it turned into a bunch of different stuff, you know.
Wow.
Because I realized that you could stick a Jazzmaster trim on it. You could put, you know, it had enough room physically to house a bunch of different, you know, a bunch of different types of stuff, and so I could explore different styles, you know, within that wheelhouse. So that's when I was like, that's when I started looking at like the Tussards and the other, you know, Fanos and whatnot. It was like a list, you know. And I started realizing that the one thing that they didn't do that I could do was build a guitar from the inside out, like a real one, you know, like, and because I knew manufacturing, and those guys, none of those guys manufactured. Right. I mean, James to this day still doesn't build guitars. He just
Trussard.
Yeah, he doesn't build guitars. He's never built guitars. He
doesn't build them.
No, fuck no. He's never built guitars. He's always put them together from other people's parts.
Oh, it's kind of like, you know, like all these guys where they just buy these body blanks and everything, and they just put them together. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, they're assemblers. They're
well, who was doing his bodies and stuff?
These guys in France originally, and then now he has them done here, CNC, you know, here.
Oh, wow.
And I think either Grover Jackson or who is it that's doing his necks? There's another guy down in...
So he's just an assembler.
He doesn't touch them. He's got a couple of guys that do all that shit for him.
Wow.
He's got a couple of knobs that just, you know.
So you are building everything from the ground. Are you winding your own pickups and shit?
No, Rob Timmons from Arcane Inc. We've been working together, and that guy's been in the business as long as I have. And he started with Michael Tobias back in 1990.
Wow.
He went to school, Roberto Van School of Luthery in Arizona. He actually went to school to learn this shit. So he was ghost building for like Fernandez and I think Charvel and, you know, James Hussard, all these guys. He was ghost building and providing pickups for these guys.
That's incredible. These guys are all like, they're not even building their own stuff. You think you're getting a custom-made boutique guitar, and it's just a fucking bolt together.
Yeah, that's kind
of like those shitty chopper shops when West Coast choppers hit. People are like, you know, oh, I'll just build choppers. So they're buying Daytech frames, they're buying an S&S engine.
It's like Shinola.
Yeah.
in fucking Detroit. And it's like there's posters everywhere, fucking Shinola made in Detroit. You go in there and there's boxes from China and they're assembling this shit. You know, it's like,
Oh, is that the watch company?
Yeah.
Oh, that's bullshit.
it's Shinola.
Oh, shit Shinola.
You know what I mean?
They're giving you the Shinola.
Exactly. So I decided early on, that was one of the things that was like, I don't want to ever fucking do that. You know, that's
Yeah.
like, it's why even bother?
Yeah.
You know, what the fuck is the point? So the lure and the lust and the desire to do something from the inside out was really where I was coming from.
That's the fucking art of it, man.
Yeah, and then,
You know what I mean?
And going back to the influence to my dad, you know, it was like I watched that dude do repeatograph, fucking monstrous image, like portraits of like walnuts and shit like that at a little tiny dots.
Just the dot.
Little dots, and they make these giant walnuts on. You know, there's no other way to do it except put the time in.
Yeah.
You know?
It's just like comedy. You know what I mean? It's like stand-up comedy.
Yeah.
These guys just want to fucking, you know, get 5 minutes together and go, hey, I want to be a star. And it's like
you have to live it.
You got to go out and eat dicks, man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You got to live it, just like you're saying.
Yeah, you have to live it. So when I came back to guitar making, I had the historic restoration thing under my belt, the guitar making thing under my belt, the drug thing under my belt, the rock and roll thing under my proverbial belt, and now I was a father, you know, a young father with a young wife, and looking at the rest of my days here, and thinking,
got to provide,
thinking like, what the fuck is the best thing that I can do? You know, what is the best thing I can do? You know, I want to play rock and roll.
Yeah,
I want to be on stage. I want to record and produce and all that shit. What's going to be the thing that I can actually set myself apart from everybody else with, you know, because there's already 10 billion of that right now. I'm not going to make a dent. What could I make a dent with, you know?
Yeah.
And that's kind of when it all kind of started, you know, circling the funnel again. And I started realizing that I had enough experience and I had enough fresh ideas to actually put something together that would not just make an impact on just the dudes that I knew, but I thought, well, if these guys are getting away with this shit just strictly on the visual, you know, then I know I could fucking kill it, you know.
Because if you have visual and it fucking caresses in your hand, it sounds great. Yeah, you're gonna be miles away.
Yeah. So the first guitars I made, I want to say the first 5 sold like fucking overnight.
And where did you sell them at? Stores or just walking around showing people?
There was a store down in LA, and then they put it on consignment for about a week, and then there was a guy in New York that bought a couple, and then Johnny Two Bags and I started working together, and I developed some stuff with him, and then he went on the road with like the first Junior that I made, like the first double cut,
right?
Because they had just come out with a new record, and he needed this particular thing on an outro solo that he did. I think it was like a California Hustle and Flow, I think was the name of the song.
Right.
So they did this, they were getting ready to do this whole tour. And so he came by and he grabbed that guitar and fell in love with it. And it was like a humbucker bass Junior.
Was it called Echopark Guitars out of the gate?
I came up with Echopark. I was working with Mike Lippy, who was actually one of my early mentors. And we started making some guitars together. We made about 5 together initially. Because what had happened is I got this idea to make the company. I made the first guitar in my backyard. We didn't have shit. I had like I went out and applied for like a $500 credit card.
Yeah.
Because my back was fucked up and I didn't have a gig. I was living on unemployment and shit like that. My wife had a job, but we had a kid, you know. So my wife was like, yeah, okay, I think, yeah, this is you should do this, you know. So I went and got like a 6-inch joiner. I went to Home Depot and spent like $500 on just little hand tools, basically. So I had like 3 power tools, and I made this Junior, and I got that Junior out into the public, and that's
what did it sell for?
I still have it. I never sold it. Yeah.
But early on, like the first 5 that sell, you don't know what kind of price tag to put on them, right?
The first one that I actually sold was sold for like $1,800.
Wow.
You know, And then I started making the clearance models, which are the telly style things, and those sold for around the same price, and there was only 2 of them.
Yeah.
And then I made the Ghetto Bird and the Downtowner Custom Koa, and
The Ghetto Bird's killer.
the El Caballo, and a La Carne. I wanted to design a full line. I was like, okay, where am I going to go with this? Okay, I know what I don't want to do. What do I want to do? I want to do like American vintage, Gibson and Fender inspired, pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the Downtowner it's interesting. It's kind of like a Les Paul Junior, and it has the 2 knobs, classic with the wraparound bridge and stuff. But it definitely has your own flavor. And then the El Caballo, is that what it's called?
Uh-huh.
It looks like the old Epiphones, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. And then the Ghetto Bird is just fucking cool as shit, man. It's just a spin-off of a Firebird, non-reverse Firebird, which is just beautiful.
Yeah.
Now, some of these other ones kind of look like, your own shape, like the Bakersfield.
That's actually like Moss Wright Ventures model.
Oh, that is that. Yeah, it just blew it up. Yeah.
And then there's the Corvette, which is the inspired by the Cornet, but I mean not the Cornet, but the Arroyo is inspired by the Corvette, the Gretsch Corvette.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do more slabby, kind of thick, hardy shit, and just kind of take basically those older designs and just kind of beef them up, without putting humbuckers, like literally just make them thicker, make them the way that they kind of should have been made, it's more.
Yeah, because back in the day they were just made real shitty.
Yeah,
those 59 TV Juniors and stuff are just. Those were just shitty guitars.
They were considered,
but they had a sound, man.
Models, is what they were considered. But I wanted to kind of base everything off of that, and just kind of circle around that magic,
Are you painting them yourself?
Yeah.
You using nitro?
All of it, yeah.
Oh, only, yeah. And then cloth wiring?
All of it.
Yeah.
It's all cloth wire. It's all, paper and all capacitors. And, all that kind of 50s wiring schematics and the whole bit,
And at what point do some celebrities start sniffing around? Because I'm just going to give you guys a rundown of who's playing these. Joe Perry, Brad Whitford, of course. These guys are guitar freaks and they have all kinds of shit. Johnny Depp, he'll play anything that Joe Perry plays. Nick Oliveri, who is an absolute god. Josh Homme, of course. All of the Queens guys play these. Dave Ketching, Eagles of Death Metal. Phil X. From Bon Jovi right now. Jackson Brown, pretty fucking cool. Troy Van Leeuwen, a lot of people that have been on this show. Who's the first guy that really gets into it, celebrity-wise?
I was working with Johnny.
Johnny Depp?
Yeah, no, Johnny Two Bags.
Oh, gotcha.
From Social D.
Yeah.
And he was like the first, I guess, if you want to call somebody a celebrity.
He's the Social D.
No notoriety, but he was the first guy and he brought with him like his love of juniors and slab body, tellies and the whole black art thing, and
that's a very junior band too.
Yeah.
Even though Mike Ness plays that Les Paul, but it's, like Drug Train with the slide, all that sound it's very P90,
Yeah, it's all P90. It's all, syrupy, plexi.
Yep.
Blackface bassman kind of thing,
It's rockabilly on fucking steroids.
Yeah, and so that was the first guy to come along, and he brought with him a friend of his, David Kalish. And David Kalish is a guitar collector, reseller, he kind of was one of the first guys in LA, like back in the 70s, to start like flipping gear and doing all that kind
like Norm Harris.
Yeah, exactly. He was before him.
Yeah.
And so he brought him along, and I got to meet that guy, and he really was one of the key guys early on that said, okay, if you're gonna make these style guitars, there's certain things you gotta hone in on. So it was like neck pitch, head pitch, tapered headstocks, neck shapes, things like that. So we talk about this shit every day. And
No shit, huh?
Yeah, so I got my hands on some early 30s arch tops and things like that, and just started kind of going back to school and remembering, like, okay, I remember that Epiphone I had when I was like 22, sitting in the park, jacked on heroin, playing this fucking thing for days on end, and it just played like fucking butter.
Yeah.
And I never, because I was playing then, I wasn't.
Yeah, you're not even you're not thinking about the build.
I'm not thinking about that. I'm just enjoying the guitar. And so I got to like circle back and like remember, oh, that's okay. Now it starts to make sense as to why these things were built a certain way and what they did and why the neck shapes were the way they were, and then the neck pitches and all that kind of shit, and the different other elements and dimensions and stuff like that. So he kind of refocused my attention on the details, And so when I did the first guitar for Johnny, all that stuff was very on purpose. It had to have, there was a list of stuff that it had to have, and so we nailed all that stuff. And they never said, okay, here's 3 guitars, you just use these. And I didn't get anything from him or anybody. It was just like, okay, this is the color, and it's a downtowner with 1 P90 and a wrap around, the rest, go for it. So I just kind of built it kind of by osmosis, by Braille, I guess. And
from memory and everything.
Just from feel, just like, okay, I know how it's got to feel. I'm just going to go with that. And that's still kind of how I do it. It's just,
wow.
You lock into certain elements, certain ingredients in your recipes, and you just kind of, that's what you do. So, but David Kalish really helped me a lot, because he got me focused on not
the vintage aspects,
beyond the aesthetics and beyond the wood, even like here's the actual numbers and details that you have to fucking perfect and be consistent with.
There's no Brazilian rosewood fretboards anymore, right? Can you get that?
Oh yeah,
you can get it.
I have a stash.
Wow.
Yeah, I started collecting wood when I was pretty young.
Yeah.
And just managed to hang on to it because, it was worthless at some... Yeah, there was a point where it was like...
Absolutely. I mean, there was a point where Gibson got raided, right?
Yeah.
And for all their exotic woods, like 5 years ago or something. You ever meet Tom Murphy?
Never did. No.
Dying to have him on the show, man.
Oh.
I mean, just because of like, what he was doing early on. With the Murphy Pauls, in like 96, that shit was like, hey, these guitars are junk. I'm going to make these better, And there's guys like Tom Murphy and what was his name? John English or whatever at Fender, all the master builders and stuff. That stuff really kind of kicked people back into loving guitars, I think.
Yeah, I think it turned people on to what was no more, things weren't available like that anymore,
right?
And so there was a market, there was a market for beat up guitars, basically, beat up old American guitars again, and they were not obtainable to the common man, at that point. So they created a marketplace for it. So I kind of jumped in on the tail end of that whole deal, and looking back, there was like, what was it, 2010, 2011. It was kind of the end of that era almost, and kind of the ship had sailed already. So what happened next for me was I got a call from a buddy who was a friend of Nick's, actually.
Nick Oliveri.
And he had a friend. His friend was Brad Whitford's guitar tech.
Wow.
And he got a hold of him and called him, and he went on the website. And back then I had like 3 models or something like that. There was really nothing available. It was just kind of like, I look at that now and go, fuck, I don't even know how I did that,
Yeah.
But like he called me and said, hey, I think Brad's would be interested in some of these. What would you put together, or what do you have available? At the time, I had just done the guitar for Johnny, and I was working on a second one with humbuckers and gold and that kind of thing. So that wound up being Brad's guitar.
Wow, yeah, there it is, man. Now, does he play it live?
He does, yeah. He does play it live, and they recorded that whole record with Jack Douglas, that last one that they did, and that guitar wound up being on the record like pretty much 100% of Brad's tracks.
So when does he come out to meet you?
No, what happened is they had asked me to ship some stuff out to Vindaloo, which was, their Boston headquarters. And obviously I'm fucking shaking in my boots, you know, and stoked as fuck. But
Yeah.
I didn't yet have the wherewithal to do those, you know, shipping and all that shit. I didn't know anything.
Yeah,
about
yeah,
any of
shipping and all that.
No, man, I'm not gonna do
You're
that.
like an old punk rock junkie. You're
Yeah.
like, shipping? Can't you just pick it up?
Yeah, I just couldn't get it, man. And so what happened is I basically I kind of thought the deal fell through because I wasn't able to ship anything. I didn't want to, anyways.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine came through. I was working out of this place called Bedrock Studios at the time, and I was doing repairs and stuff and building guitars, and I was just starting to get the guitars rolling, and I started to do repair work again and stuff like that. And a buddy of mine came through that owns a studio in town. And we were talking, and I said, man, I gotta ask you a question. What do you think about like this? And I told him, I got this commission from the guys in Aerosmith to build them a couple of guitars. They're done. I don't want to ship them. What do you think I should do? He's like, well, ironically enough, after the South American tour, they're going to be at my studio finishing the record with Jack Douglas here in L.A.
Whoa.
And that's in June. And this was like, I think it was like April or it's like around April.
Yeah.
I said in June they'll be here in LA, so you can just come down with the shit then. I said, fuck, that's great, you know. So I went back to work and finished out, like, I think I finished about 10 guitars in the interim, and one of them was the Ghetto Bird, a couple of Downtowners, a couple of Clarence Rose models, you know, a variety of things. So I had about 8 pieces done, finished when they landed. So they started working in earnest around June, July, and I called my friend and said, hey, you know, these things are done. I'd like to get down there. He said, okay, I'll put you in touch with Marco Moyer, who was Brad's tech at the time. And so I went down there with the guitars, and, you know, we set them up and stuff like that, and I got to go through Joe's stuff and hang out for a bit. And then I split, and I got a call from Jack Douglas the next day.
Yeah.
He said, hey, I want to meet you. Come down, you know. So I went down and met Jack Douglas, and it's fucking Jack Douglas.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, he did Imagine and
Yeah.
you know, all this other shit, you know, and I'm like, dude, like, fuck all this guitar shit.
Yeah, you made some fucking master records,
you're
man.
Jack Douglas. You know,
Yeah.
The soundtrack of my fucking life.
Yeah.
You know, kind of thing. And so we got to chopping it up real heavy, and he's an ex-junkie and all that shit, you know.
Yeah.
So we're just hanging out, and he's like, "Hey, I'm gonna call Joe right now and just like, you know, and you know, see what's up." So I guess that night he'd emailed Joe a bunch of pictures of the guitars that I had dropped off, and Joe got back to him and said, "Hey, call this cat down here. I wanna meet this guy."
Wow.
So I went down there and brought the old Clarence that I had, the old, you know, guitar that I found in the attic, and I'm coming through the hallway, and there's Steven comes out. He's like, hey, man, fucking your guitars are just, you know, he starts like complimenting me. Like,
wow.
I just met him, you know.
Yeah. Steven Tyler's just like, that shit sounds great. You do that.
Yeah, we weren't even formally introduced. It was like immediate like hugs and the whole thing. And he's just like, yeah, man, Joe's waiting for you inside the control room. Come on back. So, and it was like,
this is sick.
It was crazy. So
wow.
Like, all these guys are like standing around Joe and I.
Yeah.
We get introduced, and I have a picture of it somewhere, and it's just like one of the heaviest.
Yeah, right. Joe Perry, man. I mean, you know? Fucking, you got to think about the guy owned some of the best flame top Les Pauls, that one that Slash gave him for back to him, and you know, and he had all the coolest guitars of BC Rich's back in the day, the 10-string and all that.
He was one of the first guys to really play like a bunch of different shit.
Yep.
You know, a bunch of different shit that nobody even knew about.
And he had like the 5 different fucking amps on stage always. It was like sick.
And Brad got him into that shit. You know, Brad was the one that turned him on to all the wacky shit.
Brad Whitford?
So, yeah. So when I got to hook up with Brad, it was like talking about that influence in music and technique. And with Joe, it was like esoteric, like fucking, you know, magic and shit. And so I found myself...
A couple old junkies just conversating.
Yeah, I found myself hanging out with him and Steven and Jack in the control room for like 4 days.
Whoa.
Yeah, they invited that like every day. It was just like, come on, what time are you going to be here? So I'd come down, and then there was a rack of guitars that just kind of lived there. And I don't think Joe had played any of them for about a week. And then one day I was talking with his wife, and we were talking about art. And she's an artist. And I was telling her about the rose patterns and how I accomplished it, via screen art. And she's like, "Oh, I got to see this." So we go back in the big guitar room, and all the guitars are lined up there, and all his shit, and just tons of shit, and then the 4 or 5 guitars that I still had left there. And she saw the Ghetto Bird, and she was like, "Has Joe seen this?" I said, "Yeah, he's seen it. He's seen all these. But I don't." And she's like, "Is he playing them?" I said, "I don't know. That's not my. I can't do that."
Yeah.
I said, "He's Joe Perry. I can't."
Yeah. Hey, play these.
Yeah, I can't do that.
Right.
So she's like, "Well, I can."
Yeah.
And she grabbed like 2 of them off the rack, and she marched into the room, and they were firing up the Marshalls to get ready to start recording. She's like, "Joe, play this." And she put the thing in his hands, and he played it and played it and played it and couldn't stop. And it's just kind of like, I remember it like he's done more coke than we spilled on the fucking floor. You know what I mean? So there's snot dripping out of his nose, and he's just going for it,
Yeah.
He's just in the control room, dimly lit, and he like wipes his fucking nose and looks up at me. He's like, "Fuck, brother, this is amazing. How did you do this?" And Steven's there and Jack's there. It's kind of one of those huddled, quiet moments. And his wife, Billy, is sitting there. And he starts asking me questions about it. And we got into another 4 or 5 days of hanging out.
Whoa.
And he bought all those guitars.
All of them?
Yeah.
Wow.
So he kind of wiped out.
You got to be shitting your pants.
Yeah. So, and then Steven, of course, has to top that. So he bought, he commissioned me to make him a couple and Brad a couple immediately. So the first money that I made was from those guys.
That's fucking great, man.
And we were like fucking baroque. I mean, getting close to like having to move in with mom broke.
Whoa.
And they basically saved my fucking ass.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Does he hit you up still? Like, hey, I'm ready for another one?
I just kind of like I'm building one for him now, and he'll get it when it's done. And, he's works with other people, and
I love this one that he has here, the hardtail. This one,
yeah, that's the Ghetto Bird.
Yeah, but it's like a hardtail one, man. It's a one, and it's just fucking killer. It's got a Koa top. Honduras chambered body.
Yeah.
This shit is fucking great, dude.
Yeah, that was the first one. That was the one that Billy put in his hands.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah, that was the guitar.
Oh, that's the one, man. Now, so you're moving to Detroit. You've just closed your shop here, and you've moved to Detroit. Why do you pick Detroit? Is because it's cheap, and what's it like out there right now? Because I watched this thing I'd say about 4 years ago that Johnny Knoxville did a thing for Cadillac where it was like Detroit is alive and well. And he was showing these people that were coming out there and doing cool shit. Like one guy bought a full fucking 5-story building. It's like the top floor was like a skate park, and the middle floor was like, like a yo-yo factory or whatever. There was a bunch of urban farming going on, and as much as Detroit was completely dead, a lot of people were leaving, like rich hipsters and stuff from New York are like, fuck it, I'll just grab this whole building and live in this monster loft and do my life here.
Yeah, so I got hip to Detroit about 5 or 6 years ago from a buddy of mine out in Las Vegas. And we started talking about, the climate and, different, we're fathers and stuff like that. And just, I wanted to buy a house maybe, that kind of shit. And I had been working, pretty hard at that point. And so it kind of got on my periphery. And as we grew and, I was building and started working with guys in Queens and just started kind of growing and growing and growing, the hours of work got longer, the demand got higher. And
it's still just you?
It's still just me. I'd hired an assistant at that point a couple of years back and got a finisher under my belt. So I had, 2 other guys that I was working and training and working with. And then I started doing amps with my friend Eric.
Yeah, I can't find the amps on your site.
Yeah, you got to, if you go in.
Online store. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Amplifiers, because I remember seeing them on your Instagram. Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's a little hokey to navigate right now. We're changing the whole website.
Yeah. So you're building amps too, and are the amps Fender based, EL84s, 34s, Marshall based? What are they?
6L6.
6L6 is Fender based.
7581.
It's all Fender stuff.
It's Fender Ampeg-ish.
Gotcha.
Kind of thing. Very American, very chesty. You know.
Yeah.
Not so squishy. You know, I'm not really a 34 kind of guy. I like more American voice stuff personally.
I like the Tweed Deluxe.
Yeah.
To me, I think the Victoria double Tweed Deluxe, the double deluxe, is the finest amp ever made as far as a boutique amp for me, because you get that Neil Young thing, but you got some more headroom. Instead of the 112 breaking up right away, you got two 12s.
Yeah.
And I thought that they really killed it with the Tweed reissues, you know?
Yeah, they did a great job.
Yeah, they really did,
and,
man.
And that was the first thing. So I was thinking, you know, I like silver tones. Those are kind of like my thing. And 1484s, 1482s, 1483s mostly. The 1483s are just like a really poor man's bassman. You know, you get that little head and stick it through a 212 and it's fucking ass kicking.
The Bassman's the finest amp ever made. The
Yeah.
Tweed Bassman, the 59 input Tweed Bassman.
Yep.
I don't think there's a better amp made, but you need to turn that fucker up. In most clubs, you can't play that. So,
Yeah,
So that's where the Tweed Deluxe comes in, you know?
Yeah, and I got a couple of those, but so I started thinking about, like, you know, if I could do that, what would I do? You know, and my favorite amp is a Deluxe, but they're still a little too loud, I think.
Deluxe? Tweed Deluxe?
Well, blackface.
Oh, Blackface. That is the most smoking amp ever. Chuck Prophet turned me into that, like a lover of that. And it is loud.
Yeah.
But man, what a fucking amp, right?
So I was thinking, what if I could do something between a Princeton and a Deluxe, you know, but still have like that simplicity of a Silvertone. You know, that's kind of what I was thinking. So right around that time, I'd hooked up with this guy, Adam, down in San Diego, who built satellite amps, or I thought he built them anyways. Anyway, the guy that actually built them was Eric Bernstorff, and he built and taught him how to build and all that kind of shit, and helped him start his company and all that kind of stuff. Him and I got to hanging out a lot because we had the same, you know, we were just like the same dude basically. So he had actually he left Satellite and started his own thing, and then that thing was kind of funded by a money guy, you know, and that always is bad, you know.
Yeah, totally.
So the money guy started acting like he was the artist, you know, the builder, and just stuck his foot in his fucking mouth all the time.
Yeah.
And you know, was you know, just coming on too strong and being a fucking douchebag, basically. So I had the idea that if I could get Eric to work with me on amps, that we could probably design some shit that could be pretty awesome and useful. Right around that time, I was working with Troy on his new
Van Leeuwen?
Yeah, on his new setup for that tour, that tour that they did for Like Clockwork.
That record's so smoking.
It's amazing.
It's insane, that record.
Yeah, so I was working with him a lot, and something had happened to his AC30s, and Bob Dixon couldn't work on them, so I called Eric, and I had Eric down, and we were just kind of going through them and just checking them out, and we just started talking, and this is right when Eric's company was starting to just tank. And so I called Troy, and I said, hey, you know, I'm thinking about doing some amps and shit. What do you think you'd like to do? He said, well, you know, I'll bring some shit down. So him and I have basically the same kind of stuff. He had some AC30s and his blackface bassmans, and those are the primary things, and then like a Jubilee head.
Love the Jubilee.
So he brought all that stuff down, and we just kind of sat around for about a week, listening and just listening to different amps, and just he had a collection, I had a collection, and then I called Eric and said, hey, can you bring down some shit, and we'll start talking about like fixing these and kind of souping them up a little so that they could be dependable, and maybe take the best of his collection and dial it in so that he could go on the road with it. So during that process, it occurred to me that we're doing all this work, we might as well just build a fucking amp, So I had went to Texas for about a week to visit a friend, and during that trip, I bought a Brown Era Pro.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a single 12 that was converted from a single 15, but it was a Brown Era Pro with that really badass tremolo.
Yeah. I never understood those Brown amps, man. Like Joe Bonamasso's got a bunch of them, but I was like, I don't get this amp. I never got it.
They're post-tweed, pre-blackface.
Yeah, you're like, what is this? What's the sound? It doesn't have a thing,
Yeah, but I love that. I fucking love that they're just like right in the middle somewhere.
It's a bizarre era, right?
And they always sound fucking awesome. And so I bought this amp and I brought it home, and I went straight to Eric's and I said, man, this fucking amp right here is like, this is the one.
Yeah.
Like, this is the amp that we all want, really, because it's it's right around 45 watts. It's got just a creamy breakup at high volumes and cleans up really killer. It's got all the inputs sound different. The tonal range is awesome. The only problem was it didn't have a mid-range control.
Oh, wow.
And if you're using P90s or mahogany kind of guitars, you really want that.
Yeah, or else it's just going to be too muddy.
Yeah, so it was kind of like that thing. So that was what we did, and we took the amp that he had already designed, which was the little white amp. He took and used the white amp circuit. We like obscure shit, and so the white amp is a really obscure Fender amp.
Right.
So we liked the 9-watt kind of thing, the really low watt single-ended thing. So instead of a champ, we used that circuit because it's just a much more musical circuit for some reason. Like champs just are dinky sounding.
Well, they're one thing. It's just dirt, full distortion.
Yeah, whereas this little guy had a range, so we took that as our 9-watt, and then we took the Pro and powered it down and took we had a couple of Princetons that we had souped up. He had one that he had souped up over the years, and I had one that I had souped up over the years, and we compared the two and kind of came up with a selection of diodes and input circuitry that kind of meshed the two together,
right?
Without compromising anything. We actually got rid of some of the feedback loop and shit like that, and voiced it differently on the inputs, and it just wound up being really marvelous, like a really low-powered, loud little fucking amp that wasn't like a Mesa Boogie or anything like that, but just still in its class, which was about 12 watts, but just so much more headroom and girth to it, So we started fucking around with that shit, and then Troy came into the picture again, and we started fucking around with the 45A head, which was, I wanted it to have like an American voice and a British voice, but not be so AC30 spiky.
Yeah.
Still have a nice chest and a nice warm round bottom to it, with not the spiky highs, but more rounded. So we fucked with the EQ and fucked with the feedback loops, and then added the mid-range circuit to the whole thing, and really got it to dial in. And that was the amp that we designed with Troy's rig in mind.
Wow. So he's using that one?
He's been using that ever since.
Now, they all point to point?
Oh, yeah.
And then you're making the chassis, the metal boxes and everything?
The chassis are manufactured by this company up in the valley called Chapman Engineering.
Oh, yeah, I know it.
And they do mostly like race car shit, But, but the owner, the son's owner, is like a guitar guy. So he actually was doing like pedal boards and shit like that, and got into chassis because nobody else was really making.
Yeah.
And we wanted aluminum chassis and not steel ones.
Yeah.
So we got hooked up with them, designed everything, got it out,
And you got what, 2 models? So you got the 45 and then the small one?
There's 3. There's actually 4. There's the Vibromatic 13, which is a 13 watt, kind of like a deluxe, but a little bit lower powered than a deluxe. So right in between there.
Right.
And that thing smokes. And that actually wound up in Joe Perry's rig permanently, and he'd been using that ever since we started making those. But there's a 210 version of that, and there's a single 12 version of that. And there's a Marshall that was designed back in the I want to say the late 60s. It's a combo. It's a 210 combo. It's like an 18 watt.
Yeah.
One of the things that they sold over in the UK, they weren't offering them here. And Eric's friend had one, original one, so I got to hear that and decided to go with the 210 thing and the single 12 and off-air variation there. And then the 9 watt amp. And then so the last amp that we designed was the Vibromatic 23, and that's pretty much taking off what the 13 is, but it's just a head.
Yeah.
And we went with a solid state rectifier to tighten up the bottom and get rid of that extra tube, and something that ran a little cooler, because some of the wall voltages, especially in California, can go from 120 up to fucking 130.
Wow, it just varies that much,
yeah,
huh?
It's a lot of so we had to design it so that it could take a lot of heat, and very specifically. So, but that amp, there was a call. Charlie Starr from Blackberry Smoke.
Yeah,
he went on tour with one of the heads, one of the big heads like Troy's, and it was too much. It was just too loud for those guys.
No shit.
Yeah, ironically. And so he said, if you could make this a little smaller into a head, and we had already had the Vibromatic, so I gave him a Vibromatic 210, and he went out on the road with that and did a tour. Came back and said, hey, if you could do this, make it into a head with this. So he got the first one, and after, I think while we were designing it and building it, Troy came by, and he heard that thing, and he took it to rehearsal, and Dean called me the next day, and he's like, hey, man, I'm having trouble with. I think he was using some other shit, and he called me and said, "Hey, could I get one of those?" So we hooked him. Actually, Dean was the first one to get the full rig, where it's just like a Vibromatic 13 210 combo, the head and the cabinet.
That's sick, man.
For his rig, and then Troy wound up adding that to his rig, and so he wound up using it for his slide and keys, and then the big amp for the guitars, because he needed headroom for the pedals and stuff like that. And so they toured with that stuff, and that amp is actually fucking awesome. The next cycle of touring that they did was to get ready for the Iggy Pop thing. Yeah. So when they were all getting ready for that, they had their rigs and stuff like that, and we, I was kind of intimately involved with those guys in terms of the tones and things like that, and we're all just good friends. And I got a call from Josh one day, and he said, "Hey, I'm kind of bummed out that I don't have one of these. Yeah. What's going on?" I said, "Hey, man, I don't want to
come get it, man.
I don't want to I'm not force feeding anybody here, So I put a rig together for him, and he wound up basically the whole fucking tour was backlined by us.
Sick, man. And what are the amps called? Just Echopark amps?
Yeah, Echopark amps.
And now you're in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I interrupted you on that because I get excited on amps. You had heard about Detroit, so you go out and you check it out. And what is the landscape of Detroit right now? Is it still completely in shambles, or is that like all fake press news shit, Is it actually happening? Because I remember there was a time like when Jack White and Meg were living there, and I read this thing about there was this neighborhood where all the billionaire automotive industry people lived, and there were these old fucking like Victorian mansions with like Italian marble and all hand carved fucking crown molding, and these places are supposed to be insane. And I guess Jack White bought one back then for like $200,000,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that exists. I mean, it's really, it's a peculiar landscape, It's kind of like if you took the deepest parts of South Central and parked them right up against Beverly Hills and Westwood, and then took a part of Silver Lake and Echopark and parked it on the other side.
Yeah.
You know?
So it's hipsters, ghetto, and rich.
Yeah.
And they're all right on top of each other.
Yeah. And it's kind of a trip, man. I mean, when I went there the first time, it was last year in August, I just kind of got sick of hearing about it, really. And just, we had already looked at a bunch of properties and houses from Washington, you know, in Oregon all the way to fucking Tennessee. You know?
Yeah,
So
right. Because those are the cool spots. Like, I was just in Portland all weekend. I was like, I love it here.
Yeah.
It's pricey too now.
Yeah, I couldn't really, I knew that what I was looking for myself, for my art, was a place where I could land, still have all the things that I needed as far as raw materials and shipping, climate, all that kind of shit. And I didn't really have any, I don't want to say competition, but I didn't want to encroach on anybody else's territory.
Yeah, right.
You know, so I kind of wanted to be in a place where I could kind of live and work and do my thing without thinking about anybody else. You know, not that I do here, but it'd be better if I didn't have that in my periphery. So by the time we got to Tennessee last year, I kind of said, well, fuck it, we're already this fucking far.
Yeah.
You might as well just like go check it out. So I went there for about 10 days and just spent time on the ground, just driving around, looking at shit, going to clubs, meeting people, you know, going to introduce myself to like producers and, you know, artists, and then like the real estate guys and all that kind of shit. The dudes that were like doing these big fucking like, you know, making all, you know, developing and shit like that. I went and met with people like that, you know, developers, and there's a thing called the Detroit Motor City Match and organizations like that that are kind of being put together by probably the banking industry to kind of, you know, infuse, you know, life back into the place. Well, when I got there, it just reminded me of like Long Beach in the early 80s. You know what I mean? It's like really just kind of shitty and rough, but there's enough cool people here to make a cool thing happen. And it's not like a cool thing hadn't happened there before. Yeah. I mean, fucking Motown and the auto industry and the railroad industry and the timber
and then the
industry,
punk rock scene.
Punk rock, and just like the Black Panthers and social movements and just food, all kinds of shit. So it's like, well, this, you know, I didn't have to really think about it that much, honestly, because I could just open a fucking history book and there it is, you know. So I thought, well, this is really interesting because it's a landmark fucking place.
It's the Motor City, man.
And so I thought, well, fuck. I mean, if I can do this in LA, certainly I can do it here, and maybe even better, you know, because I'll be less distracted. You know, I'll be able to focus more on what I'm doing, and maybe even afford a fucking house for my wife and my kid. You know?
Yeah.
Maybe even be able to buy myself a fucking building someday here.
Yeah.
You know, maybe, you know, just all these ideas started popping in my head. I was like, so by the time I left there, I had hooked up with a real estate agent, and my wife and I had started doing the paperwork to get pre-approved for, you know, so we went with the bank and did all that shit and got all our ducks in a row. And I went through a lot of doubt, like a lot of, and still am. Kind of, you know, it's very kind of frightening. I'm from here.
You're like, from LA, man. You've been here fucking 49 years.
Moving to Mars, you know, So, you know, but knowing guys like Dean Fertitta and other guys that I have, that friends of mine that I have from Detroit, like my whole life, there's always somebody that in my circle of friends that was from Detroit, ironically. And it always just seemed like they weren't from Detroit. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah,
but
right.
It's like, wait a minute, you're from the East Coast. Why do you talk like us? Why are you so, like, we have the same kind of jargon and lingo.
Yeah.
And the same kind of like fucked up kind of, you know, thing. And so when I went there, I kind of, you know, I went to this club called the Raven club, and it's in the middle of like the crack zombie fucking territory.
Oh yeah, the part where there's no. I drove down streets there, and there was shit closed for miles, like full streets of abandoned, nothing,
yeah,
and just those oil like canister garbage cans on fire. There's no street lights, and you're like
steam coming.
You're
out
like,
of the
what the
ground,
fuck
shit.
happened here? I mean, that
amazing.
is the most bizarre thing to be going through a full city, and there's nothing open for 20 blocks.
Yeah, so we wound up at the Raven Club the second night that I went there. And this is like a shitty little fucking ghetto-ass fried chicken and waffles at midnight, fucking soul food, and just like church-style blues.
Yep.
You know, not like not like guttural stuff, not like Mississippi or Delta, but like, you know, more church-style. And they were just open arms, and outside was just crack zombie fucking destructo land, but inside was like amazing. So I thought, you know what?
It's like your dad's painting, going back to that where you grew up.
This. Yeah, I think I can get along here just fine. You know,
Yeah.
I can do this. So I got back and I told my wife, and she was like, you know what? Yeah, I think that's a good. I think I want to go and check it out. So I, you know, booked the trip, packed up the girls, we went out there. Took about a week. Had the real estate guy and booked a bunch of appointments and looked at a bunch of houses up and down the coastline, which would be like Grosse Pointe Woods, Grosse Pointe Farms, Grosse Pointe, you know, the whole fucking Grosse Pointe thing coming out of the downtown area, and that's the area, you know, the Indian Village and the, you know, all the Boston Edison, all that shit, where like there's these opulent giant fucking mansions and shit, just beautiful, but right outside, looking out your back window, is a burnt out fucking house with, you know, 5 people living in it.
Right.
Shit like that. And I was just like, I can't do that to them.
Yeah, right.
You know?
Right.
So who the fuck am I, you know? So we went and looked at a bunch of stuff, and my wife is all about the educational stuff for the kid and all that, and, you know, obviously. And I'm more about a good deal.
So, you're like, hey, fuck school, man. I don't have to build 7,000 guitars for this one.
Yeah. Well, my kid knows that I dropped out in like the 9th grade. She's always been like, how do you do this? You dropped out in the 9th grade. You know?
I don't. Why do I need to go to school?
Exactly.
You didn't.
Yeah, I remember having the conversation with her, walking her to school in like the 2nd grade. She stopped me and she says, "Daddy, how do I not go to school like you?" And I was like, no, honey, that's
so
not how
fucking funny,
that's
man.
not how it works, honey. It's an accident. This is just a big accident. So so we get there and we're looking at houses, and the girls are just thrilled. You know, it's a great, beautiful fucking weather and all that shit. And I'm like, cold schmo, fuck, whatever. You know, I don't know what these people are talking. It ain't cold here. It's, you know. So then we So we get back home. We didn't find anything. We were actually kind of depressed about it, because it was like, you know, you go there hoping to...
Yeah, see the magic spot.
Yeah, and nothing happens, and you're like, you get home, we're all depressed and shit. And like 2 days later, we were on a feed, like an MLS feed. So you get the updates every day of what's on the market. And our real estate agent had taken a vacation, and he was down in Mexico. It's like 2 a.m. I get a text from my wife, and she's like, "Hey, check this out." And I saw the text, but I didn't open it up. I went home, went to sleep, and got back the next day, and I opened up the text, and I saw it. And I hit her back. I was like, "Hey, you see this fucking house?" She's like, "Yeah, dummy. Like, there's a fucking plane ticket at home waiting for you, and go get the check, you know?
Yeah.
Go get me this fucking house." So,
wow.
So I jumped, and I got on the plane and with the check, and I went there, and when I arrived I took Grand River, which is the main, you know, thoroughfare going out of Detroit from the airport. I drove that the whole way, because I didn't want to get there too soon.
Yeah.
And I wanted to drive there and see.
Make sure you're making the right thing.
Well, I wanted to see what the fuck was on the way.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Like, okay, if I want to drive this, I want to see what we're getting into here. And it was like, there was a lot of desolation, a lot of fucking burned out shit. It's the fucking ghetto. And I'm driving and driving and driving. Finally, I get to this little neighborhood, and it's just trees. You can't really see anything but a lot of trees. And I dip into this neighborhood off of Grand River, and it completely changes.
Wow.
It's like now I'm in San Marino. All of a sudden, you know, it's lush green everywhere and beautiful houses. They weren't opulent fucking mansions, but just kind of normal looking,
right?
Kind of like Miracle Mile area.
Oh yeah,
you know,
yeah. Wow, that's sick.
Or like, you know, San Marino or South Pasadena.
Yeah,
that's
Highland Park. I mean, Larchmont, that kind of shit.
Yeah, and so I'm like, oh, this is cool. You know, I like this, and there's no burned out fucking nothing. It's a nice neighborhood, and it stretches for a while. So I get to where I'm getting close to our house, or you know, where I was gonna go look, and it just all of a sudden turns into like a fucking forest.
Yeah.
And there's like a giant abandoned golf course, and it's like trees and birds and shit everywhere, and just like all of a sudden it's like I'm in this enchanted fucking forest. And I round the corner and I see the house, and it's this giant stone Tudor from 1925.
Wow.
And just got all, you know, it's just like, you know, and I could see like it's a clay roof, you know, and the stonework was just fucking immaculate, you know. And I just parked the car and got out and sat down on the ground across the street because there's no curb. I sat on the grass and watched all the people meandering in and out of the house because it was an open house.
Yeah.
And just kind of watched and looked and just kind of started. I had to catch my breath because my heart was beating so fast.
Like, that's the one.
And I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Like, well, God, if you're real,
yeah,
get me this fucking house, you know.
Yeah, it's hilarious. A man who took bullets.
You're right.
You know what I mean? If you're real and you're still walking.
Prove to me that you're really real and get me this fucking house. So I sat there for a minute and kind of gathered my thoughts, and I was really nervous because I'd never done nothing like that.
Yeah.
You know? And I saw a guy walking around who just like looked like the guy I should talk to.
Yeah.
You know, I was like, that's the guy I should talk to. I didn't know who the fuck anybody was because my agent wasn't there. He was in Mexico on his back and, you know, under a fucking umbrella somewhere. But one of his representatives came, and I wasn't even paying attention to him. And so I V-lined it to this dude, and his name is Ron Clem, and he was representing the seller.
Yeah.
I had no idea. He looked like the guy I should talk to. So I introduced myself, and he's like, oh, okay. And we got to chopping it up a little. And there were still people in the house. So he took me out back. And he took me way the fuck out in this field. And in back of the house, there's this wall. And in the wall, it's a stone wall, or rock wall. And there's a word that's laid into the rock wall out of other stones. And in Native American dialect, it says end of the road or end of the trail. And we got to talking about my mother's heritage and all that stuff, and my dad and me and art and guitars and rock and roll and shit. And he's an ex-junkie,
Wow.
from New York. Okay, yeah, so we get to chopping it up about all that shit, and stealing cars and hookers and whatever.
Yeah.
And we get to talking, and he's like, oh, let me show you the house. So we're talking about guitar making and all that kind of shit, and he's taking me through the house, and I'm telling him about my historical restoration, experience, and pointing out details to him and telling him about the significance of some of the craftsman's work on the home, and some of the woodwork, and some of the leaded glass, and the crystal doorknobs and the woodwork and all that shit in the house, and very familiar with all that stuff. So he was like, wow, man, you know a lot about this fucking house already. You don't even know about the house. Let me tell you about the house. So turns out it was commissioned by the Fords for one of their family members, and it was a country home.
Whoa, for the Ford Motor Company owners, like the Ford people. Wow.
So they had bought it as a gift to one of their family members.
That's crazy.
And had it custom built. So he's like, hey, look at this. And he shows me, we have the original deed to the land.
Whoa.
From the 1836.
Whoa.
And also the original blueprints to the house.
Insane.
Yeah. And so I'm looking at these things just going, oh my God, nobody can. And I said to him, what do I got to do to get this fucking house? And he's like, it's not up to me, it's up to the owners. By the way, the owner was a lifelong musician who taught classical piano, violin, viola, and trumpet out of the house. You know, and they owned the house since 1970. He just died, and he was like 92 or something like that. And so we got to talking about, you know, music and the whole thing, because he taught, you know, it was a music house, basically.
Yeah.
So by the time we got done with, you know, talking and getting acquainted and seeing the house and everything, and you know, they had a bunch of offers on the house at that point, and some really good cash offers too. And the house listed for $175,000, which is
Oh my God!
retarded.
You can't even get this fucking.
Yeah,
you can't even get a garage for that.
Yeah,
in LA.
Yeah, nothing.
Yeah.
And so he said, you know, originally they were offered $60,000 for the house, and they almost took it.
Whoa!
They didn't know how much. Nothing has sold in that neighborhood for over $75,000 in like the last 40 fucking years.
Whoa!
So he said, you know, here's the thing. They want to sell it to a family that's going to take care of it. They know that there's, you know, they know that there's investors. They know that there's people that want to flip it, and you know, but they want it to go to a fucking family,
Right.
that's going to love it. And I just raised my hand. I was like, "What? That's us!
Yeah.
That's fucking us!" You know?
Yeah.
And so inside, of course, I didn't, you know, wasn't
Yep.
literal. And so I just said, "Oh, well, you know, I can assure you that that's what we are, you know." And so I kind of, as we were leaving the tour, and the daughter showed up with her husband, and I met them and got introduced to them formally, and then we got about 5 minutes together to just kind of talk. You know, it was more like it was weird. It wasn't on purpose. It was just like, "Oh, hi, how are you?" and that kind of thing. And I asked, I said, "So tell me about your dad. You know, I hear he's a musician and stuff." And so she kind of got a little teary-eyed and started telling me some stories and things like that. And she's like, "What do you do?" And I told her what I did.
Yeah.
But my wife, you know, she's an artist, and about her kid, and she was in oboe at the time, and her mouth just kind of started to drop, you know.
Yeah.
And she started to get a little wet, you know, in the eye.
Yeah.
And I said, you know, I don't know if there's any criteria for the people that, or whoever you want to buy the house, or if money's the thing or whatever, but we would really cherish this home. And so I left and got back on the plane and came back here. And a couple of days later, Ron called me and said, "Hey, you know, if you're interested in the home, they'd like for you to have it. What's your highest offer?"
Whoa!
And it's, fuck, that's amazing. So the most, our budget at the time was like $220,000, and that's fucking like every penny of cash that we had. And we had already done the pre-qual stuff, so there was a thing going on called the Detroit Motor City. Was it the Detroit Match or some kind of program like that the banks were doing to kind of like, so if you bought a fucked up house, they would actually value it higher and give you a second mortgage so you could afford to refurb it and
Oh, wow.
and live in it. So we qualified for that, even though the house didn't need any of that shit.
Yeah.
What it did was it allowed us to close the gap in what we had cash wise to what the mortgage was.
That's amazing.
So like we had $70,000 basically to dump, and we needed, you know, the rest. And so that kind of closed the gap for us, and it made us, you know, be able to get the fucking
That's
house.
badass.
So,
dude.
and that happened before we even got the house. We had kind of been handed this path, you know. So, you know, they said, "Well, we have another offer for cash, and it's $110,000 cash plus another $10,000 for all the antiques in the house. So if you can match the $10,000 cash on top of the $220,000, it's yours."
Jeez.
I was like, what? So I like put the phone on pause, and I said, "Honey, do we have $10,000?" She was like, "Yeah, we got $10,000." I was like,
"Yeah,
we'll take it." You know,
yeah,
done deal.
yeah.
Where do I deliver this box of money to? You know.
Yeah.
And so we went out and closed the deal, and
that's badass.
Had dinner. And the funny thing, the night that we closed on the house, we all went out there to do the thing and walk it and, you know, hang out with the family. And that was the first time that, my wife and daughter had been out there to see the house and to meet the family, and we closed the deal, went out to dinner. We were going to go to this Italian restaurant. Instead, we wound up going to Mexican town, this little Mexican fucking restaurant. We just walked in randomly, and Jack White and Dean Fertitta were there having dinner with their families.
That's a sign.
Yeah, so I walked up to Dean, and he was like facing me.
That's a fucking sign.
He wasn't facing us, and I tapped him on the shoulder. I was like, hey, man, what's up? He was like, what are you doing here?
That is incredible, man. That's totally a sign, right?
So, met Jack and all that stuff, and we just had a nice quiet dinner, but that's when my wife and I were like really like, okay, this is we're fucking a million miles away from home. We know nobody.
Fuck it, man.
But
you know what I mean?
But
I was at the post office yesterday, and I was like, this is an interesting story. I sell T-shirts, and I do it all myself, but, like fan shirts right there, shirts for my comedy. And as I hand wrote every goddamn label, I was sitting there yesterday going, fuck, man, 100 of these, hand writing the label. I got to get a printer and just do it. But I just like, fuck it. I don't want to pay for that, So I hand wrote them all, and I was complaining to myself. Just like, this is fucking crazy doing this, man. And I walked to the post office. It's in this drugstore post office / right here up the street. And I put them up, and the girls, I go, how's it going today? And she's like, oh, man, I fucking just hate my job, and I hate this place. And, and I realized as she was spewing her shit to me, I was thinking, man, these labels are for me. This comedy I'm doing, everything I'm doing, and it hit me right in the face. I was like, I'm so fucking happy. This girl is just spewing garbage at me. She's miserable in some shit job, and she won't even change it. You know what I mean? So it's inspiring to have dudes like you or people out there that are, taking chances and living outside the box.
Yeah, I mean, I when it all started being real and going down, then the doubt hit me. Then all the fear set in, and all the anxieties and all the like what ifs and how like all the shit was like, like what the fuck am I doing? Like, this is crazy, and all along, having friends and comrades and colleagues and buddies just going, dude, how and why, constantly like, why Detroit? How are you doing this?
Yeah.
And even there, it's like, why here? Like, what are you fucking crazy? You're in the land of like glitter and fucking fake titties and sunsets and shit.
And rock and roll, where people have extra cash.
Yeah. It's like, what are you doing here? It's like, I was like, I don't know. I don't need to know, really.
Yeah,
it's like the evidence to me.
Dude, in your shop building guitars, you're not even going to know where the fuck you are.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It ain't going to matter. I mean, really, I look at it like I serve the guitars, my wife, and my kid.
Yeah.
And the artists and clients that I'm so fucking blessed and lucky to have.
Totally.
And that's it.
Well, you make good shit, so, thanks for doing the show, dude.
Are you kidding?
I can't thank you enough for being it. And check out his website, Echopark, amplifiers.com and echoparkguitars.com. And what's the waiting list right now?
Depends, it can be anywhere from 6 months to a year and a half, depending on what it is or who it is and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff to kind of filter.
And you got an Instagram.
Yeah.
Check that out, Echopark Guitars.
Uh-huh.
And I'm looking forward to doing some comedy out there and then coming and seeing you, man.
Oh, dude, yeah.
You got to update your site here. It says Los Angeles, California.
No, that's what I'm going to, tomorrow's the day that we're changing everything. So
that's great, dude.
I'm here until the 19th, and then I go back for the rest of our lives. So,
well, thank you so much, man, for doing the show.
I'm fucking so stoked that I could do it.
Kick ass, dude. All right, guys. Thank you, guys. See ya. Candles lit.